And here we are. We are live, and hopefully you're live with us wherever you are. My name is Jay Frost. So if you are new to this party, I am the proud host of the Philanthropy Masterminds series brought to you by DonorSearch, where you can find out all about all you want to know, possibly about your donors, at least in the United States. But today we are taking the Philanthropy Mastermind series on the road. This is the first of these amazing discussions that we are having with a friend to all of us in the sector, someone who I've looked to for a long time for inspiration and knowledge, from operating right here, sometimes probably in his garden, but definitely across the pond from us in the United States, and that's in England, Colchester specifically, not far out of London, but the center of a lot of history in this part of the world, and also the central voice, I would argue, in UK fundraising. In fact, the man behind the publication that bears that name, Howard Blake. Howard, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you for finding time on your trip to the UK to spend time here. It's been a delight.
I have to, before we say anything else, I have to say we are so happy that that you could find time to do this, but also gave us the tour of our lives this afternoon of Colchester. So if you haven't been to this part of the world before, if you haven't been to England, I'm not suggesting that you use Howard as a tour guide. But if you could get him, do. But more importantly, you should definitely visit here. And maybe we can talk a little bit about that history today, because one of the things that Howard told me just a few minutes ago before we began is that his studies in earlier in his life, studies of modern history began in the 400s. So for us in the United States, of course, the 400s, we didn't have a United States, as you know. So there's a lot of history here, and I know that does inform philanthropy and fundraising. Before we do anything else, though, I want to say hello to everyone who's joining us live. Hello to everyone who catches this in a recording later. And I want to encourage you to utilize two functions we have for you. The chat, feel free. In fact, it'd be very nice for us to know if you're here live with us. Go ahead and say hello and where you're from. We'll try to monitor that at the corner of our eye throughout. Please do just open the chat up and say howdy. And additionally, we also have the Q&A. So if you have questions that occur to you throughout, please do use that. We would love to get your questions, or at least I would. And then Howard would, I'm sure, love to have a chance to answer them, because he's the brains here in this meeting today.
Thank you, Jay, and thank you everyone for chipping in on the chat as well. It's really good to see. We'll work our way through those messages. So thank you. Please keep them coming.
So Howard, where should we begin? There's a lot of history to cover.
There is. I mean, at least between you and me. So thank you. This is the first time that I've actually met Jay and his wife Yuko in person, and I've been in touch for
Back there in the
how long have we been talking to each other? 20 years, probably.
About that.
So we've kind of talked about fundraising over many years, but through the magic of digital. But now finally we get to meet, which is lovely. Right,
and that's a good starting point for people who don't know your work. You wrote the first book on digital fundraising in 1996.
That's right. It was the first guide to digital fundraising, or in those days we called it online fundraising on the World Wide Web with 3 capital W's. So that's how far things have come.
We don't do that anymore.
No, we don't even need to use the word digital. Digital just...
Okay, so start there. Tell us why.
Well, I think, actually, I'll change my view. Mostly we don't need to say digital. Digital is very useful to specify specific tech-focused, tech-enabled fundraising. So it has its use. But I think most fundraisers now have grown up with digital as the default choice of communications. So yes, I think it simply, if you use the word digital, it tends to sort of age you or date you by being a fundraiser pre-digital times. I think that's probably a polite way of putting it, which gives you some perspective.
Right. And digital subsumes many things, but all we do today is, this conversation is digital. Any message we send today, whether it's text or whatever, it's digital. And for that matter, even the phone conversations we have are digital. They're not analog anymore.
No, that's true.
So all of it is digital. But does that inform how we're communicating, what we're communicating? In other words, from yesterday, 1996 to today, are we doing things differently? Are we doing things better? I'm not talking about now the platforms, but the way we're talking.
I think that's a really, really good point. I'm going to say I will take a glass half full approach and say we are doing things better through digital, not necessarily the methods we use, but I think in the way that we share fundraising information and experience amongst fundraisers. Fine, we haven't quite transformed fundraising. It's moved forward fast in many different ways. I absolutely accept that. But I think what really has benefited fundraisers is the ability to talk to other fundraisers, particularly if you work in a single shop, if you're a sole fundraiser, which I did for 3 years back in the early 90s. I would have loved something like the internet and places like Fundraising Chat on Facebook, the wonderful Facebook group Fundraising Chat, and many other forums. And I think that has transformed fundraising. We know that fundraisers will share advice and expertise, even if some other people would assume that we're competing with each other, and we're not.
Has that changed at all in the last couple of years when it was, I mean, again, to use the dirty word, when it was really entirely digital? I mean, for those of us who stayed in our rooms somewhere.
Absolutely. I mean, and that was when it came into its own. And if you were already experienced and knew about some of these resources and just had some confidence to ask, and that's a big step for many people, I get that. But it's really important to ask, because you will receive from fundraisers. Someone will help you out, whichever channel you're on. And that, you're right, for the periods of lockdown and really deep, challenging fundraising times, I would say the ability to stay in touch with other fundraisers and just be inspired by them, I think helped many people further forward.
There's been, of course, a lot of change throughout the sector in terms of staffing, number of organizations, all those things as well. And there's been another trend, which has been, I think, been true in both countries, where there's been a growth in giving. That's something you can speak a lot to, I know, today, but also a decline in the percentage of people who give. Is that true in the UK as it is in the US?
It is. I think on UK fundraising, we've always reported on all sorts of statistics and developments and trends within fundraising, and quite often they're contradictory. So, as we know, through lockdown, there were some charities that went to the wall because they couldn't keep fundraising enough. Others had their very best year in terms of fundraising, mostly because they were well aligned beforehand. If you look at the sort of research that went into the more successful charities, they were in a stronger position, not necessarily financial, but in terms of their focus, the organizational focus on fundraising. But yes, I think that's one of the more worrying trends that we do see, that there are fewer people giving. Luckily, most those people still tend to give more in general. There are people who do step up, particularly in tough times. But yes, in terms of the average amount for household giving, I think in the States, it has pretty much plateaued for the last 50 years. I'm sure Steve McLaughlin at Blackboard, I remember him featuring that stat. And in the UK, I think household giving has pretty much plateaued. And that's not a good sign. We need to be able to grow total giving.
Well,
across the board.
Of course, the populations of both countries, I think, have grown. So that's one thing that helps.
Yes.
Helps a little bit. You have more people, even if a smaller percentage giving. But what about the bigger givers that you're talking about, the bigger gifts? Why is that happening? Is that because we're doing something right? Or is it because they're naturally more generous? Is there more to give to? What are the big dynamics here? What's driving the big gifts?
I think it's a whole range of different things, but definitely I would put down the fact that a lot of this is driven by professional fundraisers who are taught, learned how to fundraise, how to ask, and how to ask for big gifts. I think that's why there's still not enough of them. That's why there are shortages of experienced big gift fundraisers for many charities. So I will stand up for the training, the experience, and the support that fundraisers have gained over the last 10, 20, 30 years of professionally trained fundraising to ask. Yes, you can't deny that donors are generous. That's wonderful. Thank goodness so many of them have given more during the challenging times of COVID and lockdown and the impact of the Ukrainian war, the Russian invasion.
Yeah, I definitely want to touch on that because it's not far from here. I mean, the United States, we've talked about it, but it seems to have faded from the news. And there was a time when Afghanistan was on the minds of many Americans because of what happened there just about a year ago today. And Ukraine was heavy on our minds as well, and that influenced fundraising, sort of like past disasters have. We've all experienced this, right, with whether it's Katrina or the major tsunami, or any of these things. These events have driven philanthropy, but then sometimes they fade from the news. Have those things had an effect here in the same way? And if so, what effect, and are they still being maintained? Is there still an interest in those things?
There is still an interest, but naturally it declines. I think there is a fairly clear link between news coverage of disasters and the numbers involved and images. Seeing those every day, I think, seems to spur people to give. And if they're not on everyday news or across different networks, then yes, that's likely to be less impactful. Does it have an impact? I think it tends to grow giving in general. You often find that most big emergency appeals, suddenly there's a huge, tens of millions of dollars or pounds being donated. And I think yesterday we covered the fact that in the UK, the Disasters Emergency Committee had their appeal for Afghanistan, the people of Afghanistan, 1 year on had reached 50 million pounds. Which is pretty good for many compared, and the DEC doesn't compare emergencies with emergencies, but for the DEC that's a good good result, I believe. Ukraine is far ahead of that, I believe, but yes, it will decline. But I think most disaster emergencies appeals do not directly reduce the amount given elsewhere. People seem to find this ability to give more, which is fabulous and encouraging.
That expands the pie. We saw that with COVID too, people giving to things that related to COVID relief, but we also saw it with relation to people giving for things related to racial justice in the United States. Was that also a big factor here?
It was, absolutely. It wasn't internationally, but certainly here. There were demonstrations, but also campaigns, fundraising campaigns to support some of the actions.
Yeah, we saw some of the Black Lives Matter things, even at the Tate Modern.
Yes.
So it's not just a U.S. focus.
No,
that's definitely a global focus.
Yeah.
One of the questions in all that, I know often over time, to go back to something you said earlier, has to do with generational differences in giving, and maybe also the way we approach those different cohorts. If we were doing fundraising 40 years ago, and that's even longer than I've been doing this stuff, then everything would have been physical, right? By physical mail and in-person appointments and things of that nature. And then gradually moved into some of the other forms that now are all just a part of fundraising. But those forms are also things that were very familiar to the successive generations. I mean, if people are using text on their phone from the time that they could, go to elementary school or primary school, that's a very different experience from trying to talk to people in text who are in their 50s when they started using phone that way. So have there been changes that you've seen in terms of the generations and the responses to things, the way we've interacted with them and the way they've given? Is the younger generation behaving differently, and is there a promise there?
I think they are behaving differently because they just have different experiences and face different challenges. So the context of charitable appeals affect them differently. So not surprisingly, climate crisis is far more of relevance to them than it perhaps was to my generation. And I think it's just their assumption of certain things, and actually expectations, I think, are high. You shouldn't be keeping any people waiting or causing problems. But I think there's even more expectation that you simply deliver what people ask for, particularly younger people. They will not hang around, and that's a good thing. But it's a challenge for many voluntary charities that I know.
It's funny though, because the fundraisers, depending on the size of the organization, don't always have a lot of sway over determining whether or not the impact is going to be this or that. We're charged with raising the money to make it happen. But I shouldn't assume that that's true for you, the organizations you've worked with a lot, with hundreds of organizations and trained many, many more, thousands. So is that true in the UK? I mean, maybe I'll ask you that differently. From what you know of the environment here in the US, and you know both well, what are some of the principal similarities and differences in terms of fundraising and philanthropy?
I think just the ability to ask, and the fact that charitable giving and charitable asking is just inbuilt. Whichever generation you're talking to, people of all ages give. They may not be able to give the same amount. They give at different times of their different life stages, and those life stages will change. I mean, just whether you can afford to rent, whether you can afford to purchase a house, will really determine how much you give, and that's changed by each decade. So in that sense, similarities there. The belief that the sort of charitable ethos, whether it's religious, whether it's moral, is inbuilt in both. I will make that assumption that there is similarities there. Tax differences are different. The incentives to give. The UK has got some charitable giving tax incentives, but nowhere near what the level that I believe the US has. But, I mean,
Do you think that makes a big difference?
I think you'd need a fundraising researcher to comment on that. Does
dodging that question a little bit?
Yes. Do tax? I think it seems that they do work in the States.
Well, that's always the debate.
Yeah,
do tax incentives really matter or not?
Yeah,
and I'll dodge it too, because it's hard to know.
Yeah.
But if there is a difference, maybe the statistics help tell at least part of the story. Causation is not the same as, or rather, correlation is not the same as causation.
Yeah.
But what did you say that the giving percentages are here? Because in the United States, it's what, around 2.2% of GDP, I think it is. So in the UK, where are you?
I can't remember what it is of GDP, of GDP, but I know the sources which I'd point to, which is Charities Aid Foundation's annual giving report would do that. And they also do comparison of countries. And the UK does bounce up and down in terms of its sort of generosity index. So it's not always a leading
I wonder
country.
what's causing that?
I think sometimes you get outliers coming in, or just it's the product of years of training and investment in, for better or worse, calling it a developing country, that's it's suddenly improving its growth, or has enjoyed, say perhaps the middle class has enjoyed benefits or sort of increase in financial security. But I think, lots of reasons. So no, I can't remember what the UK is, which is fine.
That's okay.
I write about this stuff. I don't remember it all.
Quiz show. Okay, so if you haven't read UK Fundraising, first of all, we should do a shout out in the middle, so you'll read it. How can people get on the list and read it?
Just if you visit fundraising.co.uk, you should find the UK fundraising site. And obviously there's day-to-day news, but do a search, explore, see if we've covered your organisation or your fundraising specialism. And you should be able to find everything is tagged. It's tagged and categorised way back to 1994. So you can find some new stuff and some old stuff, which might still be relevant.
I'm sure it is. And you're also sending information continually. So I'm getting that information daily. I mean, you also have information that's shared via LinkedIn. So there's that group there. But then I don't know if you call it an e-newsletter, but whatever you're calling that, is really, really helpful to get a picture about what are the big stories of our time. Can you give us a window on what some of the big trends and stories are for the UK right now? I
think we're spoiled for choice, and not necessarily in a good way. It's whichever external crisis is causing huge problems for fundraisers and donors as well. And we're just rocketing from one to another. So obviously COVID, lockdown, which has been a challenge, but many fundraisers have risen to that challenge in astonishing ways. And then we've experienced the impact of Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and now we've got cost of living crisis, huge growth in inflation rates, mortgage interest rates, and so on. So tough times for donors, tough times for charities, and tough times for fundraisers as well. I mean, fundraisers, we're all having to pay extra for food, energy, and so on, and that is a real challenge, because where is this extra money coming in to pay fundraisers more just to keep their heads above water? So whereas that was not so much an issue, certainly with furlough funding, so the UK government funding, providing, effectively paying the salaries of many fundraisers and workers. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's different.
That saved many organizations and many people's jobs. Yeah,
that's a big difference. There has been a kind of a movement in the United States for greater pay, more time for people to have a chance for wellness, frankly.
Yes.
Ensuring that people have the time to have their heads in the game. And that's been fundraisers have had the short end of the stick for a long time in that respect. And also for pay equity. And here I'm talking about especially by ethnicity and by race, where that's always been an issue, and it's just starting to be addressed. So have those things come to the fore, and has there been any progress in the UK for greater pay, for greater time, for greater health?
Those things have certainly come to the fore, which is great, because the sector does need challenging. So yes, and it is the sort of the networking strength and opportunities of digital from which have sprung up a lot of sector-based, so individual and fundraiser and other charity staff led campaigns to make an improvement, which are just fantastic. So, for example, there have been efforts to try and improve the way that we recruit new fundraisers, not least by leaving out the requirement, the really odd, and the more you look at it, the more out of date it just seems and wrong, the requirement that fundraisers must have a graduate degree.
A graduate degree.
A degree.
A degree, okay.
A first degree.
Yes.
Which, yes, for many people can show ability, but how does that Is that a fundraising requirement for a job? It really isn't. So there's some really good campaigns like that. Absolutely, people tackling the history of racism in charities. Many charities were founded on pretty much racist principles. So there's sort of inequity built in to many organizations, and even how charities are run and managed these days. So there's a lot of very blunt, challenging, and rightly so, of ways that have been perpetuated for too long.
There was also, I know, some really topical stories on issues about the treatment of women working at charities. And you don't have to recount any of those stories, but I'm sure you covered some of them, especially with a big special event that was in London that I think probably comes to mind.
Yep.
So have those things started to not just get attention, but some treatment? Are those being addressed?
They are still in the process of being addressed, and that's a polite way of putting it. There is some work, but there are still many voices where you still hear that they have not been resolved satisfactorily, and as a result, many women fundraisers do not feel safe in their job, or meeting donors, or do not feel suitable respect. The systems have not worked, but there are activities underway. The Institute of Fundraising, Chartered Institute of Fundraising, has been criticised, is making progress. It's not accepted by everyone that it's enough and fast enough, but there are activities. For example, just a code of practice on events where a lot of these abuses have gone on. So I would say there is some work. It's changing. It is nowhere near fast enough and nowhere near extensive enough, but it's being challenged, and that's the thing. Trying to hold charities to account, trying to hold trustees, so individuals, to account, I think is truly important. And it hasn't happened. It didn't happen much in my time as a young fundraiser, but it is happening now. So I will take that as a positive, but in no way accept what's happening now is good enough.
Well, it sounds like some of the associations are starting to play a more a stronger and a more decisive role, even if it's not what everyone would hope for. Let me see if we have some questions here before we kind of round out some of the discussion. And by the way, if you're wondering where we are, would you mind telling people where we are?
We're in Colchester, which is in Essex, a county in the southeast of England, and we've just been put into. It's been described we're in drought. So if you can see our lush green grass behind you, you can't, because the grass has gone into self-defense mode, which
it looks pretty gorgeous here. I think the greenest garden in England right now is right
here. You might
do
the trees. The trees and the ivy look green. They've got deeper roots, but I think anything with shallower roots is not going to survive for longer. We need some more rain.
Well, you may get a visit from the Queen, because I have a feeling there's more in the roots and the soil here than at Kew Gardens. Let me see if we have any questions here. So thank you, first of all, for those who have posted. If there's any other questions out there or any other comments, please feel free to post them. This may be a short one today because it may rain. And Howard's been very kind to put up with me all day. So I want to just make sure I give you an opportunity to engage. But we'll start with a couple notes here that are from Arvind in Arizona. So thank you for these. My question is, what is the best way to find donors? And that's always the question. So maybe we can pose it from the standpoint of right here in the UK. Maybe if you want, you can talk a little bit about Europe. And he also asked about the book that you had published, and anything you want to talk about there, feel free.
Thank you very much. How do you find donors? You probably already know them, because they are people who are perhaps using your nonprofit services, or using your website for information. So there are people who are already self-identifying that they have an interest and perhaps even a desire to support your organization if you were to ask them. So in a way, work from the closest inwards out. So who does your organization interact with already? Suppliers, founders, volunteers, board members, staff members, ex-staff members. They know already what your charity is doing, and if you're not asking them, you're missing an opportunity. Then consider understanding your supporters is important, so listen to them. Nothing beats picking up the phone to talk, or rather listen to a donor. And that actually, funnily enough, is where so many charities did really well at the beginning of the first lockdown during COVID. As you know, just they picked up the phone and they reassured supporters that yes, it was worrying times, but the charity was still here. The charity was still committed to doing X to make a difference. we did still want support, but actually we just wanted to know, how are you? How are you coping? And
that's so important, and that's not done, right? I mean, just because people are starting to go back into normalcy, whatever that means, if that's true,
yeah,
that doesn't mean people won't still appreciate a phone call, right?
absolutely. Listening, talking to a donor and listening to them is just a fabulous art, and I can only encourage people to practice it. I wish I'd done it more as a young fundraiser, or been encouraged to do that more. You just find out so much. So yeah, that's certainly what I would do. And then just surveys, just anything that captures data on on supporters, what they think and feel, but also what they do. That does matter. So that's your CRM, your database. How much does someone give? How often? Is it going up? Is it going down? All that kind of stuff. So it's data, but it's data with a bit of compassion and a bit of listening, I would say. And you've got a good start there.
I do want to add to that, because for those who are interested in donors around the world, and there are a few organizations here that may be interested in that, of course, DonorSearch focuses on U.S. donors, as do most of the research organizations, research companies in the United States. If you want to learn more about DonorSearch, again, we're not advertising it here. They just provide us this platform. You can learn more at DonorSearch.net. But if people are interested in donors in the UK, prospective donors, and around the world, what are some of the go-to resources that you could point to? Is that a comfortable thing to ask?
It is. I mean, mainly because I just point out, go after people who know more about this than I do. And that would be, I would choose some of the discussion forums. So I would flag up again the wonderful fundraising chat on Facebook.
Right.
First of all, just search the articles, the archive on Facebook, and you'll find other people have asked this question already, and you'll get usually frank experience. So you'll not only will you just get a list of experts and providers who've helped charities, but you'll also get usually a fairly frank comment on whether it was good or bad. You're not more likely to get positive comments. So the absence of negative comments is always worth following up, if just to double check. And that would be that would be offline and not not published information.
Right, that's true. And
so
there's an APRA has a listserv like that in the United States. It's focused on research, and I know there's a good discussion that there. But is there also a companion for RIF, for researchers in fundraising?
Yes, and they've just also published a fantastic handbook for researchers in fundraising, which is, I think, they've managed to get some commercial sponsors to support that. So that almost flags up some of those commercial sponsors are active in prospect research, so would almost present themselves that way. But yes, get a hold of the book, download it from the Researchers in Fundraising group from the Chartered Institute of Fundraising.
A great organization, kind of a companion to APRA, but here really smart people, and also your book once again, or publications.
The book, I wrote a book in 1996, which was the first guide for professional fundraisers and how to fundraise on the internet. So that was called Direct Connections Guide to Fundraising on the Internet. I believe it is still available second, third, fourth hand. It's definitely not published anymore because things have moved on. And
things have changed. But there may be other things in the future.
There may well be. So yes, I was talking to Jay this morning. I'm musing on another idea for a book as part of this idea of growing giving on a massive scale. It won't be the answer to that, and I can't find the answer yet. But it's a way of tackling that and kind of cutting off or tying off one possible source. So I will tell you more when I know more.
I'm going to go back to the questions just briefly and see if we have any more out there. So again, thank you for that, Arvind. We have something from Mary, and it's quite extensive actually, so I'm not sure, I may have to summarize. Can you read that as well?
I'm looking at the top one.
Sure.
Do you have any tips for navigating the current donor fatigue, especially as inflation comes on top of the end of the pandemic and Ukraine, etc.? Do you want to have a go? And I'll join in on that one.
Wow. Okay. So, I have to admit, I'm not a believer in donor fatigue.
Nor am I. Good.
Oh, wow. Okay, good, good. I'm a believer in fundraising fatigue. And I think often that's justified because of all the things we talked about before. We've had people telling us that they need more money, but then not necessarily always giving us either the tools or the time or the care that we need, or the financial support, personally as well as professionally, to get it done. I'm not going to blame all the people we work with and for, but just to say that the work we do is not easy. And it takes a lot of energy and care and love, and so sometimes we get tired. And but I think that the donors are always ready to talk to us about what matters to them and to us.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Absolutely. I would challenge the notion of donor fatigue. Donors get fatigued by bad fundraising or lack of it, lack of being asked. It's a weird thing. And I'm not an active fundraiser now, so I know it's easy for me to say that. I absolutely understand that. But not asking supporters or the right supporters at the right time is just as bad as asking them too many times or badly or for the wrong thing. I think don't assume people suddenly stop wanting to end cancer or to suddenly start accepting mental health is acceptable and doesn't need challenging. So there are people, it may not be as many as this time last year, and those that can give may well not be able to give now or give less, or they can give in a different way. So I think it's yes, don't get too don't get persuaded by the notion of donor fatigue. People will always give. Right. And if you want the examples, see what's happened during Ukraine, see what's happened during the 2008, 2009 crisis, financial crisis. Yes, some charities went to the wall. I certainly did, but many charities did very well because they showed that they were still relevant. They could make a difference. And if what we do know is that people are desperate to see positive change, and if that doesn't come from other areas like politics, they look to the third sector, to charities as the agents of that change, and they want to be able to join in. So that it's kind of presenting that positive opportunity, either for holding the line or for actually getting us further over the line to make a difference in people's lives.
That second part, it also addresses the second part of her question, which is about donor dropout or donor retention, as people often think about it, where this idea that they've given and maybe they're tired because we're asking too much. I wonder if it's maybe that we're not showing enough love to them after they've started to give, or we're not showing them that, sure, they got us to here, but now imagine together we can get to there. Do you have that kind of stewardship retention problem here that we seem to have in the United States?
I think we do. I think I'd quite like, is it Jason Lewis's view of the messy middle? Right, I think it's really hard to get that, to get that right. Whether you call it sort of mid-level donors or whatever, but again, grouping a whole group of donors into one distinct title is probably not the best approach. But I think we know it when we're talking about it. Yes, I think stewardship is a skill. Any fundraiser should make sure that they can improve it, make sure that, given that most of the stewardship is handled by CRM tools, make sure you understand how to make the most of those CRM tools, which almost certainly will be more than up to delivering a good stewardship. So yes, stewardship is just yet another part of the skill set of digital fundraising, digital marketing. Yeah. And maybe we should all get better at that.
Right. Maybe
for retention reasons. Right. I mean, retention, that's the big word that seldom gets used.
It is. Yes, it's a big word, it's a big concept. But even if we weren't talking about money, can you imagine if, and this comes up a lot, actually, I've seen it talked about by really smart people. If we went to, if we had a wedding and we invited people to the wedding, first of all, it's who we invite. So it's the, who's in the family. Yeah. So that's one part. And then if they give us a gift, no matter how big or how small, how much we love it or how much we wonder what in the heck that is, we better thank them. And then if we remember them, if we send out some kind of card during the year or do whatever we do to just say hello to friends, we better remember them. These are the things we do for family and for friends. Yeah. But why can't we do that with the people who care about the same things we do? This is what I always get confused by.
I think it's great when you see that in action, when being done well. Right. But it still stands out. Right. So I just love the charities that do thank you days, ringing someone up, usually sort of videoing them, getting permission to use it. Right. And they just get everyone in. And apparently the feel-good factor is so good amongst volunteers and staff who just sit on the phone, calling people up to say thank you. And it's not an ask, it is purely thank you. Right. And they know the person, they know who it is, what they gave, and they can talk about the difference that it made. Find lots of people have got on that bandwagon, but that's a beautiful thing to see in action. It's part of stewardship. It's not the only bit, but it's part of it. Right.
And there are lots of ways to do that. I just heard an example from Paul Edwards, who's a great fundraiser, who talked about this yesterday about Charity Water, having a camera right there where there's a well. So if you've contributed and somebody now has water to drink somewhere, as a result of your help and other people's help, you can tune in anytime to see people getting water from a well. So you don't even have to be constantly thanking them, although you should, but it's also a way to just tune in and see people actually can give their children water.
Yeah.
And that's pretty powerful.
Yeah,
It's a way to keep people
and transparent
interested
as well.
And,
and at the time that the donor wants to see it as well. It's rather than you pushing them, say, hey, watch people at a well drinking clean water.
Okay, so maybe this is, I don't know if there's the last one we can take before we wrap up, but let me see, 250. Do you have any tips on how to approach or find U.S. donors or any online giving platforms we could use? That may be a little tougher. I'm not sure. Oh, they're in Buckinghamshire.
I quite like the fact that there's a reason why.
Yes.
So given our focus on history today and the history of a particular place, so the hymn Amazing Grace was written in our town 250 years ago this year. So there's a link.
That's amazing.
That's a pretty good link.
It is a good link.
It is your USP. Yes, I'm going to pass on to you. I think to some extent it will be see who I start off. And then finding international donors. I mean, again, have they found you already? Do they know about you? How do you communicate your relevance to them on social, on your channel, on your website, and so on? Was there any link? Have you established any past link? Have any of your trustees or past fundraisers made connections with American individuals or groups? So I'd start with that. Specifically doing the research, you're the person to know.
Well, if you'd like to talk offline about research, I'm happy to do that. And even though DonorSearch is the sponsor of all these discussions, there are many resources. And in fact, one friend of this sector, I'm sure you know her, is Helen Brown. Yes. And Helen has a research agency. She's one of a number, but Helen has spent time here at the University of Manchester as a student, among many things, and she's spoken over here. A friend of Rift too, so she may be an additional resource. But what I love about this kind of question is that it really ties to not just we're looking for money, but we're looking for people who care about similar things or people who have that touchstone of history. And I was telling Howard and my wife, Yuko, who's here in the background, I'm not sure if you can see her, she's out there drawing somewhere in the garden, is that when we were here right before the pandemic, we went to Gravesend, which is where Pocahontas was buried. And for those who know U.S. history a little bit, you know where she's from in Virginia. And so there's a touchstone there between those two places. And I've seen those kinds of connections be productive in terms of talking to people, being part of a case statement, a discovery visit to talk about something that's a touch point between those people somewhere far away and yourself. I've seen schools talk about it with graduates who no longer live in New York, but now they live in California. I've seen it in many different ways. And I think all of us, if we're finding the thing that brings us together rather than looking for money, we're looking for those pieces that ground us together. That's the beautiful thing. And for those who don't know about Amazing Grace and its history and its significance in the abolition movement, that would be another fun thing to take after this discussion today and check that out and maybe check out that organization. As we wrap up, Howard, there are other questions. My gosh, do you want to take any more?
Yes, why not? Okay. People have taken the time to answer.
Sure.
I'm more than happy to answer. Stuart asks, what was the name of the fundraising research book? It was the Researchers in Fundraising Handbook, which is new out this year, 2022. You should be able to download it from the Chartered Institute of Fundraising's website, which is ciof.org.uk.
And let me see, we do have one from Stephanie, who says that she read an article recently and they said the top 2 reasons that people don't give are 1, they weren't asked, and 2, they weren't thanked. And boy, do I agree. I'm
sure that's true.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then let me see, we have something from an anonymous. Any tips for someone who is working on fundraising and donor engagement alone for an organization? Wow, that's a lot to unpack right there. In the UK, focusing on individuals, businesses, and grants.
Oof. Okay. Well, you guessed that we both think that's really a huge undertaking. So if you're finding it hard, probably hence the anonymous question, don't be surprised. I was a sole fundraiser for 3 years, and that was a fabulous way of learning, but crikey, the learning curve was vertical, and it was very hard. I think focusing on individuals, businesses, and grants for one person, you're going to need support. So I would politely but firmly ask for support and training, and ideally support in terms of another employee, maybe half-time, part-time, volunteer perhaps, but definitely I would go for paid staff. You need support. And you probably need to need some good advice from someone who can help you with your time, which to focus on most. Yeah, lots of thoughts on that. More than happy to chat via email if you want to do that. I'm at hlake@fundraising.co.uk. Yeah, really tricky.
I did want to ask you one thing about that before we wrap, and that's about boards. So my typical response to that, not nearly as rich and nuanced as yours, says start with the board. But is that as true here as it would be in the States? In other words, it's like a pebble in a pond. The first splash that's the founder and the board members and their immediate circle, and then kind of working out for the people who believe in the same things and have resources, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
How important is the board, especially if you're a one-person shop?
It's very important. Equally, at that level, it could either mean you get to talk to or know the board members, or be able to speak to them and pick up the phone to them more easily than in a much larger organization. Equally, there may be more rigidity. It really does depend on how your organization is set up, and you may be kept away from the board. Yes, try and reach the board, try and find the person that you can talk to more easily, and who has some understanding of fundraising, ideally, and explain the need. Your job, the requirements there are monumental, and you're going to need some support. What can they offer? Could it be training? Could it be another staff member? Or yes, I think one of those two things. Otherwise, it's a redrawing of your job description, because you're going to fail, or you're going to burn yourself out. We haven't talked about that at all today, but burning yourself out in fundraising is a huge challenge, because we all feel the need to go that extra mile, whether it's digital, whether it's in person, to do too much. And we have to stand up and say, no, we need to be functioning and healthy.
That's true on both sides of the pond. So Howard, as we wrap up here in your incredible garden, are there any kind of final thoughts, especially as I take this show on the road and talk to other people? What kinds of things should we be looking to learn from what's going on here?
I think, as we've done today, both now but also beforehand, it's talk and listen to other fundraisers, people with lots of experience, and people who are completely new to fundraising as well. If there's the assumption that we've done it right or doing it quite right, just is not good enough. The world is changing. We need new voices, not least because we need new and different donors. So we need new kinds of fundraisers, and that's why talking to all kinds of people is truly important, but not just talking, listening.
Right. Ears first. And with that, I want to thank you all for hanging out with us today. This has been really a lot of fun. I mean, I'm grateful to you.
It's been a great pleasure
in real life.
Indeed, I know we've waited 20 years for this, so it's pretty joyous. Thank you for being.
Please be on Howard's, the Friends of Howard list, or whatever you want to call it. Obviously, you'll learn from him. He's out there. He's still guiding the rest of us. A window on this world, which so many of us, admire from afar. You can do that by following, of course, the work of Fundraising UK Fundraising, excuse me. I keep thinking of the old Fun Duck,
Funduck, I do remember that.
Listserv, ancient history,
Yes.
Sorry. So UK Fundraising, you can learn more about that by just looking at UK Fundraising right now, ukfundraising.com, and making sure you're on that list. And you can learn more about Howard, of course, also on your LinkedIn profile. Any other place that people should or could follow you? Or
that'll do. I think Howard Lake, at Howard Lake on Twitter, but also Giving X Limited. That is my new company name.
That's right.
So I still run UK Fundraising. I do some fantastic work with Alan, with philanthropy and fundraising in Europe and international. But I also do some work on my own as Giving X Limited, and you can find out what X means in due course. Give you that tease.
And we like that very much. A little mystery is always a good thing. And with that, we will wrap up from here in Colchester, but be on the lookout for more messages as I continue my little journey around and learn from the best across the pond. We hope you'll be there with us. The only way to find out about these sessions is to follow either me on Twitter, which is my Twitter handle is @GordonJFrost, or you can look for me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, or of course, and most importantly, look for all this content at DonorSearch at DonorSearch.net under the resources tab, or you can just get on their email list and then you'll get announcements about this about once a week. There will be a number of podcasts coming out, one with Sarah Tedesco. You'll find that a lot of fun, as well as one with the great Stacey Palmer, your counterpart, who is the editor at the Chronicle of Philanthropy. That'll be coming out in the next couple of weeks, plus more live conversations from here in the UK. So until then, stay healthy, stay happy out there. We'll look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.
Thank you for joining in. Thank you.